Hello, everyone. Today you're going to be taking a look at the muscles of the head, neck, and torso. These are the muscles that are mostly going to be found like along the trunk, the neck, and the head. So we won't be talking about the extremities as much because that gets a little bit complicated, but we'll be looking at the more simple muscles first, so we can kind of get the hang of like how to look at muscles, how to name muscles, then how to maybe orient yourselves to figure out which muscle is which. So hopefully this gets you started with looking at muscles, but we will look at the extremities next time, which is a lot more compact and a lot more muscles that are very close together and very similar to each other. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the head and the neck. So to start off with, you can see that you have the face muscles. And let me go ahead and make an arrow really quickly so that I can point out a bunch of stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some muscles here, starting off with some pretty simple muscles, which would be this one. So this right here, this muscle is right along a certain bone. If you recall, this is called the frontal bone, right along the forehead. This is called the frontalis muscle. So the frontalis muscle is right on the frontal bone, so that makes a lot more sense, but this is actually connected to another side as well, which is on the back of the head, right over here. So this muscle is actually called the Occipitofrontalis. So here, you can see it a little bit better here. There's a portion along the frontal bone, and then there's a portion along the occipital bone. So these two are actually connected by a connective tissue sheath. This is called the Occipitofrontalis, but when you just look at this side, you can actually consider it the frontalis. Now, each of these muscles is going to have its own specific action, which you do need to know. So definitely make sure that you look at the actions, the origins, and the insertions as well. And at the very least, the actions are very simple, or not simple, but they're at least a little bit more straightforward regarding these muscles. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have here. So if you look closely, this is the frontalis. And what you want to ask yourself is, what is it attached to, and what direction will it pull it? So look at these muscle fibers. Do you see these lines right here? They're going up and down, and they are going to attach to the top of the eyebrow. So when this muscle contracts, what is it going to do? What direction will it pull the eyebrow? And if there's one thing about muscle actions that you want to be aware of, is that muscles contract or muscles shorten. So whenever you think about a muscle and what it does, think about what would happen if this muscle shortens. So if this muscle shortens, it is going to pull the eyebrow in this direction or upward. So basically, when you contract your frontalis muscle, you wrinkle your forehead, but lift your eyebrows as well. So there we go. One muscle down. This is the frontalis on the frontal bone, and it lifts the eyebrows. Now let's look at a couple of muscles that are a little bit different shape. So the next one that I would like to look at is this one right here. It's a circular muscle. It is surrounding the eye, and based off of its shape as well as its location, it is going to be named something specific. So in this case, this is called the Orbicularis, and then around the eye, oculi. So think orb, like a sphere or a circle. That is going to be around the eye. This is orbicularis, and then oculi for eye. So orbicularis oculi is a circular muscle, and when a muscle that is a circular shape contracts, basically it just squeezes and gets smaller. So in this case, the orbicularis oculi surrounding the eyes is going to close the eyes. So when you squeeze this muscle, it closes the eye, and that's where you're going to have the action of the orbicularis oculi. Now, something I want you to be aware of, though, is that I'm not saying like two directions. Like for frontalis, it was only up, not down. And for orbicularis oculi, it's only closed, not open. Like you have other muscles that are going to pull things in the opposite direction, This is just close the eye. Now, in a very similar but kind of slightly different way, we have another circular muscle surrounding the lips. And once again, what's the word for a circular muscle that we just used? This is called orbicularis, but surrounding the mouth, oris. So orbicularis, oris, is surrounding the mouth. And when you squeeze your mouth muscles, this is actually going to push your lips forward like this. So when you make a kissy face or when you purse your lips, that is the orbicularis oris. Now, while we're on the topic of the mouth, though, there's actually a few muscles that we want to look at relative to it so that we can kind of, well, think about how else we can move our mouth. Because we do a lot of stuff with our mouth. Pursing the lips is only one. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few more, starting off with some superficial ones. So if you look up here, you can see that you have two muscles connected to your cheekbone. Now think to yourself, what is the cheekbone called? That is the zygomatic bone. And these two muscles will be the zygomaticus major, which is lower, or the zygomaticus minor, which is higher, respectively. So these two are the zygomaticus muscles, but you have zygomaticus major and zygomaticus minor, respectively. So let's take a look at this muscle and consider what is going to be, or what it's attached to and what direction it's going to move. So if you look closely, it is actually attached to the corners and top of the mouth. So this is going to be helping to move the corner of the mouth. And then what direction does it pull it? Kind of up and out. When you do a big smile, you're pulling your corners of your mouth up and out, and that is through the zygomaticus major and minor. Now, if you look closely, there's a muscle over here on the side. We should be able to see it a little bit better from this view. So look closely and you can see, right here, you have a horizontal muscle. While this is zygomaticus major, this muscle is not going to pull the mouth or the corners up and out. This is just going to pull the muscles slightly out. So this muscle is called risorius. So I don't have a great way for you to link that in your mind, but this is risorius. And at the very least, think about the action in this case. It's attached to, once again, the corner of the mouth, but this is not going to bring it up and out like in a big smile. This is just going to pull it slightly outward. So when you do a softer smile, or what we call a kind of like social smile, I don't know, can't do it. It's going to be the risorius. So the risorius, that is going to be this one right here. If you want to do a gentle smile, sorry, I can't do that. I always seem to be cheesing, I guess, but zygomaticus major, that's the big smile. Small smile, just pulling it outward is risorius. Now, a couple other muscles that are attached to the lips under the mouth, right over here. If you look closely, you have a couple of muscles that are going to be going to the front of the chin. So these are going to be covering like the mental foramen. Luckily, these are called the mentalis muscles. So the mentalis muscles, they actually help with pulling your lower lip outward and then causing you to do the pouty face. So when you do a pouty face and you protrude your lower lip, that's using the mentalis. And then one more, which is kind of deep. This one doesn't necessarily connect to the lips, but it is still connected to the mouth, being like the inner lining of the oral cavity. This is called the buccinator. So the buccinator is the inside of the mouth. So usually you can only see this if you remove stuff or if you look under stuff. So technically you can see a little bit of it under the risorius over here, but it's just a little bit obscured, but you can still definitely see it. Now, those are things that help to move the lips, but you can actually move the whole jaw, or rather the mandible, up and down as well. So those muscles you want to look for connecting either to the mandible or the maxilla. Well, actually the mandible, because that is the thing that's going to move when you open and close your jaw. So if you look closely, there's a muscle right over here on the side of the head, and you can see that it's a pretty straight muscle that's going almost up and down, although technically it usually does go at a little bit of an angle. But what do you see? It's connecting from the zygomatic arch down to the bottom of the ramus of the mandible. So this right here is called the masseter. So the masseter is this muscle that goes from the upper jaw down to the lower jaw, or rather from the cheekbones down to the lower jaw. And when this contracts, what direction does it pull on the mandible? It pulls it upwards. So try clenching your jaw and you might be able to feel it. That's your masseter. That's going to pull your mandible upwards or elevate the mandible to close your jaw. So when you chew, when you eat your food, you're using this to close your jaw and bite down on your food. But there's actually another muscle that will do that as well. And that is actually connected up to here. And if you recall, what bone is on the side of the head? This is the temporal bone. This is called the temporalis muscle. So temporalis on the temporal bone. Once again, think about its location. And although a little bit hard to see, it is actually going to go down to the mandible, connect to it, and once again, it pulls it upwards to elevate the jaw or close the jaw. So both of these help to elevate the jaw or elevate the mandible specifically to close the jaw. And once again, clench your jaw just a little bit, and you should be able to feel it contracting on the side of your head as well. So being able to feel these things working and moving is really a great way to kind of remember, you have it, and that is the function or action that it's going to do as well. Now, you don't just close your jaw, though. You are also going to need to open the jaw. And those will not be going upwards. Those will actually be going downwards. So what we need to do is look under the jaw. So I have a picture of a model here for you, but we will be taking a look at, I have an illustration here for you, but we will be taking a look at the model as well. So if you look closely, there's a muscle down here that's going to be leading from the mandible downward and then back. So this actually has two parts to it, or rather two bellies. This is called the digastric muscle. So digastric has two bellies, and this is the superior belly of digastric, and this, anterior belly of digastric, my bad. And then this is posterior belly of digastric. So what this can do is pull your mandible downward to open your jaw or lower the jaw or lower the mandible specifically. Now, there's another muscle down here that I want you to notice, though, which is deep or under the digastric. This is called the mylohyoid. So the mylohyoid is a broad muscle. This muscle is under the digastric. So if the digastric were here on this side, it would be running along the front of it. But the mylohyoid is deep to it or more internal. And this broad muscle is going to help with forming the floor of the mouth. So the floor of the mouth is going to be the bottom, where everything is going to rest on. Technically, there's maybe one muscle as well as the tongue that's going to be in there as well. But this is going to be at the bottom of the jaw. Now, when I say the word mylohyoid, which this muscle is named for, does the word hyoid sound familiar to you? Because hyoid is a bone that we learned, and if you look closely, it's connected to the hyoid right here. So kind of like in the top of your neck and back of your chin, that's where your hyoid is going to be. But you can see the hyoid bone here floating amongst a bunch of ligaments as well as tendons of muscles. This is the hyoid bone. And that is going to be helpful because there's a couple more muscles with the word hyoid in it that we can look for as well. So mylohyoid is one of them, which is under the jaw, or sorry, under the digastric at the bottom of the mandible. But then going down from the hyoid, there will be a couple more muscles. You can see them right here and right here. So these two muscles are connected to the hyoid, so they will be named for hyoid as well, but what's the other side connected to? So this one is relatively clear. You can see it connecting up here from the hyoid down to here at the sternum. So this muscle is called the sternohyoid. So sternohyoid, very luckily, this is going to be connecting from sternum to hyoid, and when you contract this muscle, it actually pulls down on the hyoid bone, which is going to be helpful for swallowing. And then in a similar manner, there's another muscle that does the same thing, but it's right next to it. But this one, once again, has two parts, so it's a little hard to see. But I'm going to show you this and look very closely at the faint parts, which are behind some other muscles. This right here, which goes down and out. This is called the omohyoid. So the omohyoid has a superior belly and an inferior belly. So omohyoid, which is more lateral, sternohyoid, which is more medial. So once again, these muscles look similar, but if you look closely at what they're connected to and then even their relative position to each other, that's how you're going to be able to figure out what is what. So before we move on to a picture of a model, let's look at this one over here as well. If you look closely, this right here actually has three different connections, and that is going to be in its name. So this right here is connected to the sternum. This right here is connected to the clavicle. And then this on both of these two different parts is connecting back here. So right behind the ear. So this muscle runs kind of like along the neck at a diagonal fashion. This is named for its three different parts, which it connects to the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process. So this muscle's name is called sternocleidomastoid. Sternocleidomastoid. So I know, when you think of that word, when you heard it for the first time, you saw it on the page, you're like, what the heck is that? Sternocleidomastoid, but now you can see that it's actually pretty simple. Where you can see it has three different parts: sternum, clavicle, and mastoid process. So sternocleidomastoid. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, but let's look at these muscles on a couple of models. So to start off with, under the chin, here, let's bring this picture along just so we can compare. You see how this is under the chin? This right here is the anterior belly of the digastric. This right here is the posterior belly of digastric. And then what's under that? If you look closely, you have this broad muscle, which is under the digastric. This is called the mylohyoid. And you can see the hyoid bone here, and you can see the hyoid bone here. So let's look at this even on another picture. So over here, almost the same kind of image, but let's look for those muscles again. So here is your anterior belly of digastric, posterior belly of digastric, mylohyoid, but now we can see under the mylohyoid, where we can see a few different muscles here. So once again, it's a little bit confusing because they're cut in this case, but let's look at them carefully. So if you look closely, you have a couple muscles which are more superficial. So those are the ones that we want to look at first. So this one and this one are your two superficial muscles. The one that's more medial, this one is sternohyoid. So this one is deep. You actually don't need to know this one. but this one is called sternohyoid, and then right next to it, omohyoid, specifically superior belly of omohyoid. And furthermore, that omohyoid has two parts, one that goes down, one that goes out. Superior belly of omohyoid, inferior belly of omohyoid. Now, we have our last muscle, which was the sternocleidomastoid. And although you can't see it too clearly here, I mean, you can see it clearly, but it's a little bit hard to tell. These two are the sternocleidomastoids, which are cut. So let's actually look at that on another model right over here. So here, maybe look at this one first. So right over here, you can see that you have this muscle that goes along the neck diagonally. This is the sternocleidomastoid. And you can see that it's attached to two things down here. This would be connected to the sternum in the middle. This part is connecting to the clavicle. And then it is connecting up here to the back of the ear, which is at the mastoid process. So this one is sternocleidomastoid. Now, we actually haven't really talked about the function, so let's consider that for a second. Do you think that this is going to pull on the sternum, or do you think this is going to pull on the head? And when you think about that, which one is more easily movable? So the sternum is actually the anchor point. It's actually going to pull on the head. So when you contract this muscle, it is actually going to pull it, at least on one side like this, and this causes a twisting motion. And this twisting motion is called rotation of the head. But in a specific term, it's actually contralateral rotation of the head. Because when you contract your right sternocleidomastoid, you actually turn your head to the left. So you contract one side, but you turn your head in the opposite direction. Same thing with the other one. You contract the left sternocleidomastoid, you turn your head to the right. So that muscle is going to be right over here. You might even see a little bit of it. You got kind of a fat neck, but you could see a little bit of bulge. That's going to be right over here. So sternocleidomastoid, it helps with rotating the head, but it also, when you contract both of them at the same time, pulls your head downward like this. And what you're doing here is decreasing the angle of your neck. And we have a word which describes a decrease in angle. That is called flexion. So another action that the sternocleidomastoid will do is flexion of the neck. Alrighty. So see, I think that's most of our neck muscles as well as most of our head muscles. Let me just go ahead and take a look to make sure I didn't miss anything too much. All right, so a few more things I would like to talk about are some muscles that I would argue are some of the hardest to see. So looks like the best picture. Best picture might be this one, actually. So hold on one sec. I think I probably have a better picture than this. So let me just take a look for that before I talk about it. Yeah, and while I do, I guess, just to be clear, I am looking for the scalene muscle. So the scalene muscles are muscles that are somewhat deep in the neck. It's a little bit hard to find unless you have some good reference points to find them. And here we are. I do have some better pictures. Let me go ahead and bring those over. So taking a look at these images, you can see that on this side, there are three muscles that are actually very close together. and they're relatively deep. Like, believe it or not, you can find these three muscles in this mess pretty easily. Because if you look for certain structures, if you look for certain reference points, that is going to be really helpful for finding some of these structures. So it's not just looking for muscles, it's not just looking for exactly what you're trying to find. Use other things that are really prominent and very clear to give you some sort of point to reference from, even if you don't know what it is yet, or even if you only have a small idea of what it is. Take note of those things, because if you can find it really easily, then that's somewhere that's a good start to work away from. So these muscles are called the scalene muscles, and you have three scalene muscles, which is anterior in the front, middle in the middle, and then posterior in the back, respectively. So let's get an arrow real quick, and what we'll see is that you actually have these three muscles in here, but what you want to look for to help with finding them is a blood vessel called the subclavian artery, and then a group of nerves called the brachial plexus. So if you look closely, well, actually, let's consider, what does subclavian mean? Subclavian, under the clavicle. And then what does brachial mean? That means arm, so this is going out to the upper extremity. So what you'll see here is that you have the subclavian artery right here and the brachial plexus right next to it. These two things are really helpful because they're really easy to find, but also they'll be between your anterior and middle scalene. So look closely right here. This is subclavian artery, this is brachial plexus. Right in front of it, this is the anterior scalene. So if you can find these two and where they come out of the neck, this muscle right in front of it is the anterior scalene. And then also look behind it, brachial plexus, subclavian artery, this is the middle scalene. And then lastly, we only have one more to go. Right behind middle scalene, this is posterior scalene. So they're a little bit hard to find unless you have something to help you. So look for these two. These two will help with showing you where those other muscles are, because this is the subclavian artery, this is the brachial plexus. You can find those two between anterior and middle scalene. And that just gives you one last one, which is right behind it. This is the posterior scalene. And you can see it on this image as well. Just, it's a little bit of a tough angle, but if you look closely, this is the subclavian artery and brachial plexus. Subclavian artery and brachial plexus. That means that this muscle on top of it is anterior scalene. This muscle right behind it is middle scalene. And then I would say we need to turn it a little bit in order for us to see the back of it, or sorry, the posterior scalene, but at the very least, anterior scalene right in front, middle scalene right behind. Anterior scalene right in front of subclavian artery, middle scalene right behind. So that's why looking at other things, giving yourself a reference point is often really, really helpful for finding some of these muscles. So I would say those are probably the best models to find that on. But there is one muscle I forgot to mention, which actually drapes over everything and covers the stuff that we usually want to look for. This muscle is this really, really thin but broad muscle that drapes over and covers it. This is called the platysma. So the platysma is actually going to be covering everything unless we remove it. So usually when you look at a neck model like this or like this, the platysma has been removed. Now, this isn't necessarily a super strong muscle. This is just helping you to tense your neck. So this is the platysma. It helps to tense your neck, but it also does help to open the mouth as well. All right. So I think that should be most of the neck and head muscles. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of your trunk muscles as well. Now, I actually forgot to mention, these scalene muscles are actually helpful for elevating the ribs. And you might be asking, why would you want to do that? it actually helps with increasing the area for breathing. So it increases the space within your rib cage or your thoracic cavity so that you can inhale more and breathe more. So when you do like a big breath, like you are actually using extra muscles that you don't usually use to further allow you to breathe in more, which scalene muscles is one of those that do that. Now, some other muscles that help to do that include the intercostal muscles. Now, do you remember the word costal from anything? That would be like costal cartilage, such as these. Those are the ribs. So intercostal is between the ribs, and do you see these muscles in between the ribs here? Those are called the intercostal muscles. And you actually have two layers of intercostal muscles. You have the internal intercostal muscles and the external intercostal muscles. So you can see those here as well. Internal intercostal, external intercostal. And these muscles will help with either, for internal intercostals, depressing the ribs, helping you to actually decrease the space and breathe out more. Like you can breathe out more. External intercostals do the same thing as the scalene muscles. They let you increase the space by lifting up the ribs. Now, when you look at these, you can tell that one of them is deeper and one of them is more superficial, but you can also see that the fibers run in different directions. Note these lines going up and inward. These are going to be internal intercostal muscles. Note that these fibers are going up and outward or up and laterally. These are the external intercostal muscles. So these are going to be deeper muscles of the chest and thorax, but you also have some other muscles that we'll look for as well. Let's actually look at the back while we're here. So looking at the back, there's a few muscles that we want to look for. The first of which is the most superficial one and one that you may actually have heard of. This muscle right here is called the trapezius. Now, you may have heard of this as its shortened name, which is the traps, but this is the trapezius for the full name. And there's actually three different parts to the trapezius. The trapezius has different fiber orientations based off of what direction those are going. So these would be superior fibers of trapezius, which are going upward, middle fibers of trapezius, which are going across, and then inferior fibers of trapezius, which go downward. So these would be the three different fibers. And if you look closely, they're attached they're attached on both sides to the spine or the vertebrae or the spine of the vertebrae. And then also they're attached to the scapula. So once again, think about which of these two different body parts is it going to move? Is it going to try and move the vertebra or is it going to move the scapula? And the correct answer in that would be scapula, because this is the more mobile part. This is like your shoulder or part of your shoulder. And this is going to move the scapula specifically, not necessarily your arm, but your scapula. And this is going to be the muscle that you can use to move your scapula, either upward to shrug your shoulders. That is your superior fibers. Middle fibers help with retracting your shoulders. So when you pull your shoulders backwards like this, so I'll try and do it without moving my arms too much, but retract your shoulders, bring your shoulder blades closer together. And then the one that's usually pretty constant, I guess, depressing your shoulder blades, that is going to be using your inferior fibers. So depending on what direction those fibers run, they will pull on your scapula in different directions. Now, we have some more back muscles here, but we're actually going to talk about those later. So we'll keep those for next time, but these are called the rhomboid muscles. But a couple muscles that you might be able to see here on this model are muscles that will be running along the vertebral column. So this is called the erector spinae group. And there's technically 3 muscles in here, but I think erector spinae group is fine. So erector spinae group actually is going to be composed of spinalis, iliocostalis, and longissimus. But basically, these erector spinae groups are going to help with straightening your spine, straightening your vertebral column. So what's helping you to like straighten up your back so you can have good posture? This is your erector spinae group. Now, on the front of the abdomen, there's a few muscles that you'll be familiar with as well, or at least a couple. So looking closely, you've got some pretty distinct muscles over here. These are called your rectus abdominis. Your rectus abdominis is what's making up your 6-pack. This is going to be these straight muscles that go up and down, but then they're also divided into those little sections. So this is the rectus abdominis. And let's take a look at this closely, because if you look, you can see that you have some connective tissues which divide it up. This one is called the linea alba. So the linea alba is going to be running down the front of the rectus abdominis, right in the middle. And then you also have the tendinous intersections that go across it. So the tendinous intersections will go across it to divide it up between its like different packs or different sections. So divided in the middle is linea alba. Dividing across is tendinous intersections. And then thinking about the action, what does this do? Like, when do you use the rectus abdominis? When have you worked out the rectus abdominis, maybe? It's when you flex your torso. So when you do that crunching motion, which you kind of like pull your upper chest down towards your abdomen and kind of like bend it, the word for that is flexion or decreasing the angle, but this is flexion of the trunk. Now, that's not all of your abdominal muscles, though. Look on the sides over here, and you might have noticed that you have these other muscles that also are going to be important. These 2, at least, are called your abdominal oblique muscles, and you actually have 2 of them. This one on the lateral or on the superficial portion is called the external oblique. So external abdominal oblique, this muscle, if you look closely, is going down and inward. So going down and inward, this is the external oblique. So kind of forming like a V shape. It goes down and inward and forms like a V. This is the external oblique. Now, what do you see on the other side? You should see an external oblique, but what do you see? The external oblique has actually been removed. And if you look closely, there's another muscle here which has muscle fibers going in a different direction. These muscle fibers are going mostly up and in. So when they go up and inward, this is going to be the middle layer, which is called the internal oblique. So you have external oblique going down and in, internal oblique that goes up and in, and you have one last third layer, which is actually pointed out already. This is called the transverse or transversus abdominis. So look closely and you can see that you have these muscle fibers that go across or horizontally. These are called the transversus abdominis. And the transversus abdominis is going to go across like transversely, and this will be the deepest layer. So look closely and you can see that there are actually 3 different layers here. One that's deep, one in the middle, and then one that's superficial. This one that's most internal is the transversus abdominis. This one in the middle is the internal oblique. And then the one on the very outside is the external oblique. Now, while we're here, actually, these models don't show it too well here. There's another muscle that we can see here on the inside of the abdomen. This right here, this muscle that's going under the lungs. This is actually dividing the or the thoracic and abdominal cavities. This is called the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is this muscle right up here, and this is going to help with respiration. All right. Now, lastly, a couple muscles which are a little bit deep, but these will also be connecting to your vertebral column. These are called the psoas major and the quadratus lumborum. Actually, I guess quadratus lumborum is the only one we're talking about for now. So the quadratus lumborum is right over here. This is going to be connecting to your lumbar region. So what does lumbar mean? It means the vertebral column. So the quadratus lumborum is going to be right over here, and this is connecting to your vertebral column. And quadratus lumborum, you can see on the other side, is connecting to your iliac or your iliac crest. So your iliac crest is right over here. Quadratus lumborum connects to your lumbar region, but then if you know what quadratus means, it means like 4 sides. So 4 sides is kind of blocky. 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is at the top. Quadratus lumborum. And then if you look closely, there is another muscle that you can use that helps you to reference to, or refer to as a reference point. This muscle is called the psoas major. So the psoas major is this muscle that's medial to the quadratus lumborum, but we'll be looking at that later. But what else do you see here? You can see transverse abdominis, internal and external obliques. So don't forget that you can see a lot of muscles on a lot of these muscles as well, or a lot of these models as well. Just make sure that you look at everything carefully. So I think with that said, that should be all we need to cover for this time at least. We'll be looking at the upper and the lower extremity muscles during this week's class. So look forward to that. I guess that's it. I'll see you all at the next class. Good luck with your studying, and I'll see you all next time.